because I can always edit it. Okay. It's actually very strange because I'm kind of looking at myself as I do this. Okay. Hi, everybody. This idea is, the idea of this class is that we all know that coming into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur can be beyond overwhelming. I mean, this is, we have a Siddur that's about this big that we say week in and week out, and we don't even do all of it. The majority of this gets said on Rosh Hashanah. And this is just Rosh Hashanah, this book, right? I mean, the Yom Kippur ones, as I put out in the letter, are not even going to be out until next year of this edition. So we're going to be getting those next year. It's a lot. There's a lot in here. Now, to be fair, this has lots of additional stuff that our congregation's custom doesn't use, etc., etc. And this class is not exclusively about the book of this particular, but it highlights for us how challenging Rosh Hashanah can be, right? Lots of words that we're not familiar with at all in English or Hebrew, right? Meaning even if you don't read Hebrew and you follow the English words are not easy. They're not common. The prayers follow the same structure as our weekly prayers, but there's tremendous difference. And plus there's the entire atmosphere of what it is that we're trying to do, of what Rosh Hashanah is all about. So my plan is, what I'd like to do in these couple of sessions that we're going to do on this is to kind of have a couple of words of introduction and discuss today the Shacharit and Musaf prayers on Rosh Hashanah and kind of look at some of the examples in here and have some commentary as well. And then next week to talk about the shofar and the Torah readings. I also, if either of you or anybody else or anybody who might watch this has specific questions about specific things or things that just have been bothering you for 40 years about Rosh Hashanah, then I'm happy to try to incorporate those as we move forward. So that's my plan, if everybody's good with that. I'll tell you what those are in a minute. So first, some words of introduction. Number one is, I read a beautiful suggestion, which is, Susan, you have children. Simcha, you don't have children, but you were a child.
I was once.
And you know people who are, and you know people who have children. And I can't imagine the parent. I haven't had the opportunity so far because Nava's still young, but I can't imagine the parent that hasn't said at least one time in their child's life, anything worth having is worth working for, or no pain, no gain, or something in that idea, right? Something in that vein that we have to expend some effort to get reward, right? And I'm not talking about kind of godly reward punishment. I'm talking about for us, what it does for us. So, yet we, grown-ups, myself included, come into Rosh Hashanah and kind of hope and expect, I'm going to walk in, and whether I come to shul every week or I don't come to shul except on Rosh Hashanah, I walk in and I expect to be awed and moved and say, well, this is it's the high holidays. This is the days of judgment, and I better really, get through this. And of course, this should move me, but we don't really put the work in beforehand. So that's what this class is here for. And hi, George.
Hello.
I was just saying that people with children might have heard the phrase, you get something, you get out what you put in, or nothing worth having or nothing worth doing is worth, now I messed it up. I don't know what I said. Right? But you have to put something in to get something out, right? And that should be the way we think about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as well. That it's easy to kind of come in and expect, the rabbi and the cantor to, it's easy to expect it. It's wrong to think that they'll be successful in kind of wowing you and blowing you away and doing everything that they need to do, without you putting in some effort beforehand to be prepared.
Of course.
So that's what this goal is. So that's first of all.
Well, you're talking about preparation of the prayers.
No,
I'm thinking emotional preparation, personal preparation.
Either way.
Right.
I'm not necessarily saying just the prayers. I'm saying in general, in order to have this experience, in order to have this experience be meaningful, you have to prepare yourself for it.
You have to be into it.
Right? You have to get yourself into it. You don't just have to be into it, you have to get yourself into it. Okay? So that's one of the things we're going to work on, and the prayers are meant to help you get there. Right? And that's where we sometimes lose it because they're so long and there's so much there. Right? So in terms of prayers, right? One thing and a second thing with a couple of subheadings about prayer, right? Number one, there's a lot to be said for prayer. There's a lot of debate and discussion, and I've talked about it in the synagogue and whatever. But I want to focus, when we talk about prayer for Rosh Hashanah, not on any question or possibility of prayer affecting God. Meaning, I walk into Rosh Hashanah, right? We all know the idea of the book of life and, God writing us in the book of life. Whatever you think about that or whatever, that's not when I'm praying, I'm not really believing, right? Or I don't want to discuss it in that context, that if I pray hard enough or well enough, that God is going to take the eraser and erase my name from the book of death and write it in the book of life. Right? Because on some level that's an absurdity. Right? Who knows better what I need and want and should pray for than God? So everything that I say is kind of meaningless. Again, there's all kinds of discussion. This isn't. I don't want to get too far and too deep into that. But prayer, I think, because prayer is, because I would like to suggest, at least in part, and again, there is plenty to suggest in Jewish tradition, in Jewish theology, that there is something to be accomplished through prayer, right? Meaning affecting God. But
for the person doing the praying, in my
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
I'm saying there is the other approach.
Yes.
But I'm saying what I want to focus on is how it affects us.
Yes.
Right? We do it, and we're commanded to do it so that it affects us, not so that it affects God. Right? Again, there's mystical interpretations. There's all kinds of reasons to say that yes, if you pray for X, then maybe that will happen. But I don't want to discuss
right here. I haven't looked at this book yet, but in all the other prayer books I've seen for Rosh Hashanah, prayer, repentance, and good deeds avert the evil decree.
Well, that's what the English says. I don't even remember if that's what the English says here. That's not what the Hebrew says, right? It's actually a perfect. Well, we'll get that. We'll definitely deal with that today.
You're reminding me of that for the rest of our lives together.
So, and then the kind of the sub things about prayer. Right? I've said it before in the synagogue. A few minutes of good introspective prayer is better, and I may be hurting my own business here, but it's better than 5 hours spent in the synagogue and not affecting yourself, right? Having it not affect you. I would hope that those few minutes come in the synagogue, right? I think that we probably have to spend more than 5 minutes in the synagogue praying, whether it's in the synagogue or not in the synagogue praying, in order to have that effect on ourselves, right? 2 hours of prayer might, if we're lucky, get us 5 minutes of real introspection. But it's not the goal, is not to spend as many hours as possible in the synagogue. Okay, so that's another level of it. It always bears repeating. The words are there and they're important, but it's also important to understand, to read the English, to understand as best you can what the Hebrew is saying if you don't follow the Hebrew. It's important to, if a phrase, whether the Hebrew and the sound of it, sometimes it can be a little bit just meditative, or the English because it's very meaningful. There's nothing wrong with lingering over it and repeating it. Saying, oh, this is something that does have meaning for me and something that I do appreciate, and I can focus on that. And maybe I even come back to it later on. And of course, slow is another key word. Not trying to rush through it. The cantor is there to lead the congregation and help the congregation with the flow of the service, and hopefully to inspire the congregation as well. But it's also important to pray at the pace that you need to, which is why I think if I have been successful, then every single time we've said the Amida since I've been at Beit Chaverim, I always say at the end, please take as long as you need to complete your private Amidah. Sometimes I get the words wrong and say, please take as long as you like, or please take as long as I want, or something like that. Somebody once commented.
I've always heard you say that.
No, it's an effort that I make to do so. Okay, so all that being said, like as I said, that is a by way of introduction. I want to say one other thing to kind of get us in the mood for this, which is a famous idea that on the one hand we're not free to desist from the work, but we're not obligated to complete it. Right? The famous Mishnah. We're trying to make an effort. Right? I believe that that's what God wants us to do. That this entire process is about making a concerted effort. You know, it's the anti-New Year's resolution. The New Year's resolution of January 1st or December 31st is, how can I update my Facebook status so that people will think that I'm really looking to have a more meaningful year coming up, right? And we all know how long those resolutions last usually, because they take as long to write and to say as they do to think about them, but they don't come from a process. I think that the Jewish idea of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is to engage in the process first of preparing, and then at the end, maybe if I'm lucky, I can say what my resolution is. I can say that now I have the opportunity to, maybe I can try to do this year, this week, this month. And that's how I want to go. Okay, that all being said, everybody have a copy of the book? Oh, so, and these pages here that I provided you, you can take, there's a double side and then a single side. These are, I think, great questions. Yeah, that's one, yeah. These are a whole list of questions to start you off. This is personal introspection,
yes.
Right? I mean, that's all this is, right? This is great. These are a whole bunch of questions, right? Look at these questions for a moment and see kind of the things that we should be thinking about. And I don't think they're exclusive to Rosh Hashanah. I don't think they're exclusive to Jews. I think these are the big questions, right? When do I most feel that my life is meaningful? Are there any ideals I would be willing to die for? What are my goals in life? What project will I most regret if it's left undone? When do I feel closest to God? What have I been avoiding? I mean, these are big questions, right? That we don't like to think about. I mean, they're questions that the psychiatrist might ask you, but they're also questions that we should ask ourselves, and perhaps we imagine God asking us these questions as Rosh Hashanah approaches, and this other list of values, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, how important are each of these to you, right? Family, being well educated, making contribution, marriage, spirituality, etc. You can see all of these, and I think that if we think about where our priorities lie, it helps us to think about where we need improvement or where we want improvement ourselves. Because every person's needs are different.
Who wrote this?
This is, I don't remember the name of the person. I believe it's by Rabbi Shimon Appisdorf in a book called the Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur Survival Guide.
Oh, okay.
So there's some useful things there, and I wanted to give people that opportunity. So we'll take this book for a moment. As I said, it's an opportunity to introduce us to this book a little bit for those who are here. There's 200-something people who you will have a leg up on, so to speak, having gotten to see this first. Right? If you've looked at the Koren Siddur that we have, some of the things are simply the same idea, right? There's certain pronunciation aids that no Siddur before this has had. which is just in terms of helping to pronounce. If your Hebrew reading is needs a little bit of practice, so there's certain aids. But that is one could say that's pikayun. On the other hand, the words are important. If I'm going to point the three most interesting ones out. Two are about vowels, and one is about words in prose. If you look, why don't you open to page 9? It's as good a page as any.
The italics page
9? No, in the actual book. All right. And look at the second line of Hebrew. The second line of the Hebrew, we're familiar with this, Asher Kiddishanu. Mm-hmm. And I emphasize that because that's, if you look at the vowel under the Daled, you will see that it's bold-faced, so to speak. If you look on the first line of the Hebrew, at the end of the word Baruch, mm-hmm. right, and also later on in the word Melech, you'll see that vowel, even though it's the same vowel, it's called the Shva in Hebrew, that vowel is not bold-faced, right? And that's because there's two different ways to pronounce that vowel. One is the silent Shva, and the one is, there's a word for it, I forget, there's some fancy word that basically say it's a moving Shva, right? And those vowels are pronounced differently. It's just ease in translation. It's one of the things that throws bar mitzvah kids off all the time. So this is a bad example because it's the end of a word. But if you look on any other page where if you find one of those shva vowels, here's another example. Look on page 11, the next page. It's actually one word that has both. It's a good way to see it. Right? The third line of the Hebrew, lahadlik. Right? The first shva is li. It's a syllable, mm-hmm. and the second shva under the letter daled is silent. Lahad. It stops the syllable rather than moving the syllable along. Okay, so that's one. That's one feature. Second one.
Because if you didn't know the distinction and you're learning this for the first time, you'd say lahad.
Lahad, right? Exactly. Now it's clearly
we don't know that.
Right.
We don't do that.
There's certain things that kind of we know instinctively,
right.
but others that we don't. Okay. Now, if you'll turn to page 21. I just want to go through these quickly because I think it's nice to see what's going on in here. Right. On page 21, it's in the middle of the page. There's a line that begins "Ledor vador nagid." Okay. So this is the end of the kedusha that we're familiar with. Right. This happens to be. We'll never actually say that on Rosh Hashana, I don't. but this is in the mincha before Rosh Hashana. But just to point this out, right? Do you see that line?
Not yet.
Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
4
8,
from the middle.
9. Thank you.
Yes.
It's the eighth line of Hebrew text.
Yes.
Right? Ledor vador nagid.
Yes.
There, the fourth word. Look at the vowel under the gimel and look at the vowel under the final chaf. The vowel under the final chaf is what we recognize as an ah or aw if you have a more Ashkenazi pronunciation than I do. Right? I don't know what the Germans do, George. You have to tell me what the Yankees do. But right? But
definitely
you'll notice
aw.
that right? Aw, right?
Where I grew up.
Right? But if you look under the gimel, you'll see that it looks like the same vowel, but it's not exactly. Right? You see how that vowel looks like the same? I mean, when I'm teaching kids, bigger. I call it the T vowel, right? It's bigger and longer. The irony is that the reason why they did it is because that vowel is called a kamatz katan, a small kamatz. And it actually is supposed to be pronounced O, a long O sound. So that word is god lecha, not gad lecha. And again, it's something we're familiar with, kind of certain words we know, like kol. Sometimes we'll see that word and we know that it is supposed to be an O there, but we don't really understand why. So the Y is because of grammar rules, certain rules of Hebrew grammar, but here's an aid that tells us what that is.
Now these vowels that have been printed this way are later, I'm assuming, are later additions to the original prayer. Or were they originally printed that way?
I would not say they're later additions. Meaning those specific things, but the rules of grammar determined that that is the proper way to pronounce it. The vowels, these prayers, meaning other than I think what you're thinking about is the Bible text.
Yes, I mean
but most of these are not biblical texts.
I see. These
right?
are all way post-biblical.
Way post-biblical, yes. Most of these prayers are, meaning each of them, and some of the commentaries tell it, each of the prayers comes from different, right? The Amidah is probably, around the time of the Second Temple, right? In at least some sort of embryonic form. The Shema obviously comes from the Torah, so that's original. The poetry, what they call the piyut, the religious poetry of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is mostly medieval. So at that point, they were writing it with vowels, I think, or at least they provided the vowels because they knew what they wanted people to read it properly, because the educated class might know what the words were, but the uneducated class might not have, and so they wanted to make sure that they
during the Temple period they were not using vowel symbols?
I mean, they weren't using prayer books. They weren't using printed prayer books anyway. It was obviously before the printed text, but they were barely even using manuscript textbooks, Sidurim textbooks, manuscript prayer books, right? They were using psalms mostly in the temple, right? The history of how prayers developed in the synagogues outside the temple, right, which developed during the first exile and kind of continued during the Second Temple period, is beyond the scope of what I want to talk about. But there's a lot of literature about it, right? Meaning synagogues existed, contemporaneously with the Second Temple, right? What happened in them is a matter of scholarly debate. Okay, but something happened, and sacrifices were not what happened.
Right, they couldn't.
Right, meaning the sacrifices only took place in the temple, and these did not. Ironically, because during the first temple time, there was a lot more sacrificing going on outside of the temple, right? But there were no synagogues.
That's why we got punished. Now,
among many reasons.
This big or.
Yeah.
So it's not pronounced God.
No, that is God. God lecha. Again, if I pronounce things like my grandfather did, it would be God lecha, right? Since I pronounce it like my father does, it's God lecha. but that's what we're dealing with. Okay. The third piece that, again, if you've looked at the Siddur, and this is the thing that to me makes this book. It really is the major selling point. Obviously, we all notice that kind of it. I'll do this for those who might watch this video. That the Hebrew and the English are on the wrong sides, right? Or at least that's what people have said to me. They're on the wrong sides, Rabbi. The Hebrew is supposed to be on the right, and the English is supposed to be on the left. Now, of course, there's no such thing as right or there's right, but there's not right or wrong when it comes to these translations and the way they're printed, because that's. This is only in the last 100 years, if that there have been translated siddurs and prayer books printed, right? So the fact that we're used to one convention is just because we're used to one convention, right? That's done in order actually so that you do look at the translation, so that you don't, right? If it was coming in, then you kind of automatically go back to the beginning of the line in the Hebrew, and when you want to look at the translation, it would be much harder. They both start from the center to help you actually look at the translation and say, wow, what does that mean? But the other thing that's interesting about it is that in almost every book, with the exception of a brand called the Metsudah Siddur, that I know the Danzers like to use, right, or Paul Danzer likes to use, is the only one that has something similar, which is that many of the prayers, rather than filling the line and being justified, line after line after line of text that just probably starts to look like one of those, magic eye pictures after a while, because it's so dense. This breaks up the text, sometimes even taking the place or in addition to a comma or a period, so that you will pause naturally and take extra time to focus on the words. Right? That's the reason why it's done this way. So you can see it all over. You can see it done in some of the Psalms. If you want to look at page... Ashrei is a bad example because they do that with Ashrei all the time. But you can look at page 335. You can see that in Psalm 150.
And there are more English words on each page because of the nature of the two languages. That English is more has a richer vocabulary.
It's not so much that it has a richer vocabulary; it's that
English larger
is,
vocabulary.
I wouldn't even say it's vocabulary. Hebrew has certain things built into words. Pronouns are built into words.
Yes.
Right? Meaning, I'm trying to think of an example, but I could say I could say 3 words. I could say 1 word in Hebrew and need 3. Right? Anochi is I. Right. Anochi sometimes is just I, actually. Right. But that's the problem, right? That's the difficulty.
But that one
in
word can mean 2 things, whereas in English you'd say it separately.
Exactly. Right. But also, like I said, pronouns. He, she, it, them, they are included in the word because of the verb structure very often. And so there's no need to repeat that. Right? Take a look at page 363. I mean, this is, it just, again, I think to me highlights what this book has done, right? To make things a little bit different, and they could be jarring to the eye. Right? They could have done this whole page in one paragraph, kind of probably taking up a third of the page in terms of the words themselves. But instead, it's spread out, and it kind of says, "Oh, well, what's this saying?" Right? Right, if you look at the words, this is just from the blessings before the Shema. So this is a regular weekday and Shabbat prayer, not specific to Rosh Hashanah. Right? May you be blessed, proclaim
this can help a person learn Hebrew.
Yeah.
The way it's written.
Although you do have to be careful because sometimes the lines don't match up. Right. That's the only thing that I would say that. In addition, as many of us know, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who did the translation and the commentary, is a master of language and a master in terms of his understanding of these prayers. So the commentaries on the bottom and the introduction at the beginning are spectacular. They are not word-by-word commentaries like other prayer books have used. They're, I would say, almost holistic, right? What do you need? What more information or what other feelings do you need to get through these prayers and to understand them a little bit more? Okay, that's what I think can be very beautiful about this. Again, I think, as I've said before, right, there's going to be a lot during the high holidays. There's a lot of, what educators would call frontal, even though the cantor is facing the ark, right? But as opposed to facing us. But there's a lot of time when the cantor, right, is doing something, is praying, and we're doing quote unquote nothing. Right? We can be listening, we can be trying to be inspired, sometimes we're singing along, but there's times when we just might tune out of that. So I think that there's a lot of richness in these books of things that we can kind of follow along, just say, oh, what's he saying? Let me understand a little bit more about that. Or, like I said, just read the introduction. The introduction is gorgeous, and I think will help to inspire what we're doing. Okay. So what I wanted to do with the time we have left is to actually look at some of the prayers. And I mostly want to look at ones where either there's some difference between what we do on Shabbat, on a regular Shabbat, and Rosh Hashanah, or meaning that either there's different words or something added, or just it's done a little bit differently. So the first point I want to make is on page 347, right? 346 and 347 if you look at the English. This is the opening bell, so to speak, right? Meaning, just like using the Wall Street metaphor for a moment, right? Meaning, brokers and traders are doing what they do. They have a lot of prep work, right? That's everything up until now. Again, the morning service. The book begins with the evening service, of course, right? But we've got, looks like close to 100 pages of prep work, right? It's not really 100 pages because a lot of that's skipped or whatever, but right, it's preparatory. It's the verses of praise, the Psukei de Zimra, that we do every Shabbat the same way. It's no different on Rosh Hashanah. We say the exact same things on Rosh Hashanah that we do on any other Shabbat, right? It's longer than it is on a weekday, so we do what we do on Shabbat rather than weekdays, but that's because we're not going to work. We have time to do that. Right? The pickup point, the opening bell that sounded is different. On Shabbat, the opening bell is sounded on the third line here. Shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo. He inhabits eternity, exalted and holy is his name. The opening bell on Rosh Hashanah, and it's preceded by a beautiful melody, and then, in our case, David Eisner, who leads this service, approaches the bima and goes, HaMelech, which of course means the king. That is the motif for Rosh Hashanah. Right? We've seen it, we've heard it. If you had to pick a word that describes and talks about what Rosh Hashanah is about, the king. And that's how we lead in. That's how we begin that part of the service. Even though it's a word that we say every Shabbat, right? That word is kind of included earlier, right? And which I think is an interesting point to make. Hamelech is just a word. I don't mean to be flippant about it, right? God is always our king, 365 days a year, or however many days there are in the lunar year, right? Every day God is our king, right? Every Shabbat we acknowledge God as our king, and of course Hamelech, the word Hamelech appears in the daily prayers in certain places, and this is a longer poem that introduces things for Shabbat, so it's always there, right? But what matters? Our approach. What matters is how we are approaching these prayers. So the same words can be approached from a different context. Here we're approaching it from the perspective of God is our king, and over again, that motif is going to repeat itself. Right? I mean, that's, whenever I say the word motif, my head kind of goes back to elementary school and here's like Peter and the wolf. Those melodies. Here's the Peter, here's the wolf.
I got to tell you, just the minute you sang that word, I'm already into the Rosh Hashanah mode. Just the hearing you say it.
Hear that.
You hear you say it, and you know Rosh Hashanah is here.
Right. For me, it's that
Yes,
but anyway,
yes.
that's right. But again, these are visceral things, right? We heard them when we were little, right? We hear Kol Nidre, we hear certain melodies, right? Which is why these are so universal. Listen, I like, as you all know, I like Shlomo Carlebach's songs as much as possible. Shlomo Carlebach did not write a new melody for Kol Nidre, because how could he? I mean, that would be, it's unthinkable. It would jar everybody in their seats out. They would rise up and protest, because there's something about that. It's like the smell of chicken soup in your grandmother's house. You smell it, you hear it. This is the sounds of Rosh Hashanah, right? So that Hamelech is a sound, and of course it draws your attention to the word, right? So that's the first thing. The continuation after that again is exactly the same as we do on a regular Shabbat, right? With almost very few differences. There's the extra word in the Kaddish. There's a couple of words changed here and there, but more or less we're talking about the exact same words from this point and through the Shema, right? You can notice, look on page 355. The only addition, again, in our service, there are some synagogues where they kind of add more piyut, right? The piyut are, again, the religious poetry, or the prayerful poetry that's been added in. Right? After Baruch Hu, in this first blessing of Yotzer Or U'Varechoshesh, blessed are you God who forms light and creates darkness, right? There's this one line that's added in, right? And you can see on first day some congregations say there's a little bit of these notes here that we don't do that. Or olam ba'otzar chayim orod me'ofel amar vayehi. Endless light in a treasure house of life, lights from obscurity, he spoke and they became. It's another motif, right? Because whenever you hear the words, he spoke, right? God spoke and they became, then we're transported back to creation, right? God spoke and the world came into being, right? The king here is not just the ruler, but the king is the creator, right? Which is why the prayer of Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, is so poignant, right? Because God is at once our King, our ruler, and our parent, our Father. That's something that, only actual children of kings and queens in this world know, right? Meaning nobody, no one of us has both of those experiences, right? Meaning I might have a king if I live in a country where there's a king, right? And I have a father and a mother, and I know what it means to be a child to a parent. But at no point in my life are both of those the same, right? I don't know how King Solomon thought of his father, but I guess they didn't say these prayers, so they didn't have these prayers in the same way, so they didn't have to worry about it, right? But it's a fascinating thing, right? We have both Hamelech, the ruler, and the creator, right? Now, creator has different connotations, right? But here, I think we really think of the creator as being a benevolent creator, right? Because God created the world for us to live in. The only line that's changed between Shabbat, and in fact, we even do the week. There's a difference between when Rosh Hashanah falls on a weekday and a Shabbat, and we do exactly what we do. So this year, Rosh Hashanah will be on Thursday and Friday. So you'll see here on that page 355, it continues on a weekday, Hameir La'aretz, and compassion he gives light. Great. If it's a Shabbat, then we would turn to page 357 and do that one, which is exactly the same as the Shabbat one. And we continue on with the song El Adon, etc. All the same, through the Shema, all the same. Over and over and over again. There's, again, a slight difference in terms of one of the introductory parts to the Shema, where it talks about the angels, right? But it's a slight difference, and it's cosmetic. It's really just cosmetic. So that, as I said, kind of brings us all the way to the Amidah, right? Now, at the Amidah, things begin to change a lot. Right? The structure is the same, right? We begin with the same paragraph, right? Every Amidah in every, except for Yom Kippur where we have the extra, the vidui, the confession, but every Amidah throughout the year begins and ends the same way, right? Same first blessing, same ending blessing, right? Sometimes there's these interpolations that we have, but they're the same, right? They have the same blessings each time. Rosh Hashanah, almost immediately we start to see additions and I won't say changes but the meat of it is very different, and where that meat comes in and is changed is important to notice. Turn to 381. I'm only right now going to look at the silent Amidah. The silent, again, it's not Shemona Esrei because there's only 18 or 19 blessings during the weekday Amidah, right? The Shacharit Amidah on Rosh Hashanah, if I'm not mistaken, has 7 blessings. The Musaf Amidah has 9. I could be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'll correct it on the video if I mess it up. Right? The first paragraph remains the same, right? We invoke the memory of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? This is the beginning of every Amidah. The famous and very well-known addition that we add throughout the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not just on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur themselves, right? Remember us for life. Again, these additions are all related to the blessing that's being said, right? Just as we're invoking the memory of our ancestors, we want that memory to help us be inscribed in the Book of Life. And you know, to the obvious question of when is this added in? Well, the idea of the Book of Life, again, I don't know what goes on, you know, with God.
It's in Exodus 34.
It is?
Not the phrase Book of Life, but when God says to Moses, when I make an accounting.
Right. Okay.
So it's sort of a book of
right.
life.
So meaning that idea again. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that there's no Book of Life, but I don't know what its ISBN number is and where it sits in the library. I don't know how it works. I don't know how God decides that God can, you know, write in the book on Yontif. I mean, the rest of us can't. How, you know? I mean, again, I'm being flippant.
It's a metaphor for God's mercy and judgment.
Right.
But I'm just saying that the notion that God does do an accounting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Accounting is there. And I should add, by the way, that one of the things that the commentaries are there to help us do is to the people who wrote the more ancient prayers, right? Like the structural parts of the Amidah, like that first blessing, as well as the people later, the medieval rabbis who wrote the additions that came in, were masters of their craft, meaning they knew references and what scholars say we'll call intertextuality. When they write one line, it's supposed to hearken back to something else. So I pointed this out like on Friday nights, right? And I was reminded of it because we read it, because we had a bat mitzvah yesterday who read Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. Lecha Dodi, right? Lecha Dodi, come my love, come my beloved, right? Go out to greet the Shabbat bride, right? Where's that? But it's not just some made up term, right? It's borrowed, right? Lecha Dodi is a late prayer. I mean, we're talking about post-medieval, right? It began at the earliest in Tzfat in the 16th or 17th century. Right? No question that it's a later addition. It's become an important part of our prayers, but it's not ancient in the same way that that this is, certainly not that the Shema is, right? But what is it doing? It's hearkening to Lecha Dodi, right? It's hearkening to the Song of Songs, to this beautiful poem of love between, whether it's King Solomon and his queen or God and the Jewish people, as the metaphorical understanding is. That's what it's there for. Lo tevoshi v'lo tikalmi. Don't be afraid. These are verses straight out of Isaiah, right? So when these rabbis wrote these prayers, they're trying to remind themselves and us of other texts, right? And they brought them together. And I've said something, so it's the same thing with the things we say on Tisha B'Av night, the keynote on Tisha B'Av, same thing with the slichot that we'll say Saturday night. It's the same. That's all of these things are written by people who knew the Bible, the entire Bible, backwards and forwards, and they had and they knew the Talmud, and so that they knew things that would at least in the learned people evoke certain feelings and memories and thoughts. So it's a beautiful piece. Right. So it continues on. Again, there's some additions, but it's not specific to Rosh Hashanah necessarily. If you turn to page 385.
While you're looking, I don't want anyone listening thinking that I might be off by a chapter. It might have been Exodus 32.
It's okay, I'm the one who's embarrassed I didn't
Exodus
know.
35. It's around there. It's around the 13 attributes discussion.
Fair enough. Okay. So here we have a blessing that in every, other than Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this is one of the shortest blessings of the Amidah. Normally it reads, Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh v'kadoshim b'chol yom ya'alucha sela, right, the top of 384, 385. You are holy and your name is holy, and holy ones praise you daily, Selah. And then, and don't ask me what Selah means, because nobody really knows. It's not Selah the rock, because that's with an I in it. It's a different spelling. And then it concludes. Then the blessing usually concludes. Baruch atah Hashem ha'el hakadosh. Right? Blessed are you, God, the holy God, the holy. Right? That's it. That's the whole blessing. The rest of the year, even during the weekdays between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's the same. It's exactly the same, except for the change of one word. Ha'el hakadosh becomes Hamelech hakadosh. Right? Again, right back to that leitmotif of ours. Right? The king. And in fact, the law is that there's a bunch of different additions for the regular weekday Amidah during those days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If you forget any of them, then the law is that you don't have to repeat the Amidah, except Hamelech HaKadosh. Right? If you forgot that, you got to do it all over again, because that is the essence of what we're talking about during that period, is recognizing God as king, as ruler. So here, instead of going right to the blessing, now if we were looking in the repetition of the Amidah, by the way, it might be 15 pages before we get from these two lines at the top of 385 until the Chatima, the closing of the blessing, where it says Baruch atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh.
You have time for a question?
Yeah.
You've just proven in what you just said that this is a holiday of awe. Now, when I grew up in a reform shul, I was educated in a reform shul, there was awe. I mean, people came into that shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and no joking around. I mean, there might have been, a little bit of talk, but this is the week where you better get serious about your relationship with God if you haven't been serious all year. I get to the Orthodox community, and there's an optimism to the level that we are going to be forgiven, that we are going to be written in the book of life, to the level where the same prayers that I heard in the Reform are sung with almost a joyous melody. I'm thinking, what is going on here? This is supposed to be, we're supposed to be sort of shaking, not shaking, but confident that we will have a relationship with God if we try. But it's a different kind of environment with a level of optimism that yes, indeed, this is going to work. We're going to get through this week, and we are going to be closer to God. And it could give the impression to somebody who doesn't know what you just said about if you don't say our King, that there's a less feeling of awe among those who are sort of taken for granted that we will be forgiven, we will come closer to God.
I'll tell you, I think that, you've heard me say this before, I think that almost everything in Judaism is a dance between two poles. Almost everything. And the dance on Rosh Hashanah is Avinu Malkeinu. When we do something wrong when we're children, we know, as scared as we are of what our parents are going to say,
they love us.
We
no matter
know that
what.
they love us
That's
and
right.
they're going to forgive us.
That's right.
And that's Avinu. On the other hand, we have Malkeinu. We are standing before the King of Kings, right? And so the next line that I didn't even get to, but you hinted at so well, Simcha, is Uvechein tein pachtecha. Place the fear of you over all that you've made. And of course that means in us too, right? The fear is there, but yet it's a fear that's similar to the fear we have of our parents. When we're young, we fear our parents, right? I mean, we hopefully love them also, but at some point when we do something wrong, we hopefully fear them. But we don't fear the severing of the relationship.
No.
That we never fear. And, every synagogue is different. I imagine, that one could go into a Reform synagogue where that feeling is not there and different from what you grew up with. And I imagine going into an Orthodox synagogue that is very tense and really, I've been in a number of different synagogues on the high holidays, and I've seen the same human being laugh and dance and sing with joy on Rosh Hashanah and cry and shake with fear. Same person.
I have
Because
to.
we dance.
And the other thing
we
I'm
make that
thinking,
dance.
my sampling, I've only had a sample, not a big enough sample to make the broad statement. You're right. Each congregation is going to, maybe it depends on the mood of that moment also.
That's true. That's for sure true. So, this idea of uvchein tein pachtecha, right? This fear that we have is, again, a fascinating piece because we don't like, it says, God, we're asking God, again, how the idea of prayer works. Are we asking God to do, are we telling ourselves, is this reflexive, right? I don't think I mentioned it before, right? The Hebrew word for prayer is lehit palel. Lehit, the hit pa'el formulation, any word that begins with a hit, right, before the verb form, before the verb root, is reflexive in Hebrew, right? When I get dressed, if I want to say I wore a shirt, I would say lavashti chultza, right? If I want to say I got dressed, I got myself dressed, I say hit labashti, right? That's like kind of a simple example, right? So hit palel means that praying has to be reflexive about me. because that's what it is. That's what it means to be involved in this process. Right? So we say we're on the one hand we're speaking to God, but we're speaking to God, perhaps speaking, again, if you take kind of the idea that we have an eternal soul, that every human being has an eternal soul that is a spark of God, right? We're speaking to that spark of God within us. That's a whole kind of Kabbalistic, mystical thing I don't want to get into, right? Because it sounds potentially heretical as I say it that way.
You're reminding yourself that we are more than just an animal.
Right. We're taking that soul, which, again, in the mystical idea is a part of God that's within us, right? But that means that if it's within us, then we're really within God, and there's a whole other level there, right? But we're saying, okay, well, I want my soul to remember this about my relationship with God, to remember this fear, this terror, this awe. Now, again, that doesn't feel good. That's not comfortable for us. That's way out of the 2011 America comfort zone, right? We do not like to feel fear. We do not like to feel terrorized by the unknown. Right? On the other hand,
we're not terrorized. It's God our Father here. We're not being terrorized.
Well, again, but depends on how you feel. But we're saying some very strong things here, right? And it's interesting. Kind of, there's a dance, and we'll see the dance, right? What do we say, right? Even though we're saying this fear, right? Look at what people go to do. Look at what's a popular thing to do is to put yourself in dangerous situations. Right? I mean, you don't have to watch a reality show, right? People go skydiving, and it's exhilarating, right? What makes skydiving exhilarating? I mean, in a roller, for that matter, what makes a roller coaster? I don't have to go so extreme. What makes a roller coaster exhilarating? It's fear, right? I mean, it is fear. I think. I don't know. Anybody here roller coaster person? No roller coaster person? No, nobody. All right. When I was a kid, I liked roller coasters. I did like roller coasters. And but skydiving is way beyond me. Forget it. I have a friend who had to get a whole bunch of rabbis to go skydiving all together and raise money for something or another, or raise awareness. Forget it.
With any openings.
What?
They want to
Did anyone point out that you're not allowed to do that?
Because you're risking your life?
Yeah. Guard your soul with utmost care.
Well, but then, again, the question would be, is it really dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning, because as could easily be said, right, I probably have a greater risk of dying getting into a car.
No, you don't.
Well, certainly getting into a car in Israel.
Oh.
Right? I mean, fatal accidents happen all the time. And there could be a drunk driver, there could be listen, my wife was in a car accident. I mean, she was rear-ended by somebody who was looking at by somebody who was rubbernecking. Thank God it wasn't serious. I mean, nothing happened. It was a big deal. It was a fender bender. But
you're confusing probabilities with consequences, so that it's a different kind of risk. Probability, yes, you are more likely to be in an accident in a car. But the consequences of being rear-ended in an accident in a car are not the same as the consequences of the chute not opening or breaking a leg, or something like that. The two elements of risk analysis.
I hear you. I don't think it's really. Again,
I'm sorry.
Don't get me. Like I said, don't get me wrong. I'm not the one going skydiving for exactly that reason. But I don't even have to go that far. I don't even have to, couch it in the terms of, I could, right? I mean, again, there are a lot of risks that I can take, right? And there are a lot of risks that every one of us takes, right? If you ever cross the street in New York City, that's a risk. Across the street over here in Westport, right? There's a sign as you come on the post road from Norwalk to Westport, right over here, where it says, "Welcome to Westport. We observe traffic laws." And I kind of feel like that congressman. You lie. I mean, it's absurd to me. Anyway,
But getting back to
I'm gonna have to cut that out before I post this
That's-
anywhere because Westport's gonna sue me.
we don't have to fear God in a sense of we have to fear getting estranged from God. We have to fear the punishment that we bring upon ourselves. But we do have a relationship. If you have a relationship, then you're told here on this holiday, improve yourself.
Let's read through the paragraph for a moment. Right? I'm going to read it in English on 384. And so place the fear of you, Lord our God, over all that you have made, and the terror of you over all you have created. Now that includes us, but it's not just us. And all who were made will stand in awe of you, and all of creation will worship you. And they will be bound all together as one to carry out your will with an undivided heart. For we know, Lord our God, that all dominion is laid out before you, strength is in your palm, and might in your right hand, your name spreading awe over all you have created.
Just to prove my point, I've now read this for well over half a century, and never in well over half a century did I ever think that the terror of you over all you've created pertained to me. I'm thinking, put the terror over the next guy so that I can be safer and happier here.
But we're included in it.
I never thought of that until tonight,
Okay.
because I never thought of being terrorized by God,
And again, it's not.
and I still don't.
God for
Right.
and again, God forbid, especially in this day and age when the word terror has different connotations to us. We're sitting here 2 weeks, a week after 9/11, the anniversary of 9/11. So don't get me wrong. In fact, obviously one could say very clearly that that's exactly referring to some of the people that we want to feel this terror and awe.
Yes.
But it includes us too. And but what I'm suggesting is the following. Again, there's a dance. If we felt terror all the time, we would cower in our seats if we even made it to shul. We would sit there in terror and fear all the time. If we thought about what it means to break my covenant with God, what it means to be estranged from God, we would not be able to function in our lives. On the other hand, when we think about fear, and we think about, I'm uncomfortable with that. We think about some of the things that we might actually put ourselves in that situation, right? And forget the skydiving for a minute, right? Take being in a car, right? Let's forget the risk, whether it's a risk or not.
Right.
Let's say you are involved in an accident that, either is close to life-threatening, or you're injured, or you escape injury. It causes you to take stock.
Sure.
It has a certain feeling of exhilaration, right? Because you survived it, right? And even if you're hurt, you've survived something that, and sometimes, God forbid, I hate to say it, right? But sometimes, you see the other guy and you are incredibly thankful. You have an incredible feeling of what you just went through. So I'm suggesting that if we're uncomfortable with fear and terror, we might want to remind ourselves what fear and terror does for us, right? We might want to remind ourselves what, we as certainly in this metropolitan area thought about 10 years ago at this time, right? There's all kinds of talk, right? All the talk of coming together and being a society that started to value more important things. That lasted 5 hours or so? God. I don't remember. I'm not going to say it because somebody from Hollywood will come and sue me for it.
Just to be a little bit picky here.
Sure.
Why is it stated, "and the might in your right hand"?
That's a metaphor. That metaphor again exists going back to the Torah, right? I don't want to screw up the word or the verse, but off the top of my, certainly in the entire story of the Exodus, we have
The
that
hand of God, no finger of God.
hand of God, finger, but right hand. But the idea of the right hand was the idea of strength. That's a metaphor. I don't have any problem saying it is explicitly 100% a metaphor, but
the left hand, sort of historically, is considered evil.
you're speaking to a left-handed person, so please.
I'll repeat it then.
Right? I don't know that Judaism ever considered the left hand evil.
But then were you making distinctions instead
The right
of
hand was
your
the hand of strength. The right hand was the hand of strength, right? It's interesting, right? And again, this is the beauty of Rabbi Sachs' translation, right? Oz biyadcha, strength is in your palm. Now that's hand. That's still hand, but he translates it as palm. Now I don't particularly know whether the nuance, and I trust his judgment in making that statement. It might be poetic license. It might be that the real meaning of the word yad, of hand, is that. Because yad generally just to mean, when I hear yad I think hand. Maybe it does mean, there might be something to mean palm.
We're privileged to have the benefit as one of your colleagues pointed out to us several months ago, we have a language that we speak that has 8 times the vocabulary of Hebrew. So we might as well take advantage of it.
Right. So, and the difference between strength and might is also an interesting distinction, right? And again, the Hebrew is oz and gvura, right? Gvura is the same word that we use to describe the second blessing of the Amidah, right? The blessing that begins, right? It's from the word gibor, right? Which we think of as like heroism, right? Ata gibor le'olam Hashem, you're eternally mighty. Right, it's the verse that speaks about the resurrection of the dead. So it's the verse that speaks about that we include the line about letting rain fall, right? Allowing rain to fall. Mashiv haruach amrit hageshem, right? That God causes the rain to fall, right? Gvura is might, but it's reserved might. It's might that I can use, not I can use, right? But that God can use in the appropriate way. But it's not overt, right? It's not Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? I'm sorry I used that example, but that's what came to my mind, right? That's strength. Okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger is strong, right? Right, a boxer or whatever. That's a strong person, not a mighty person, right? A mighty person has strength that's held in reserve.
Right, you could be frail and old and still be mighty.
Absolutely, right? I did check, right? So as I said before, from the just from the song at the sea, and I'm sure it appears before, right? But Yamincha Hashem Nidari Bakoach, right? Your right hand is majestic in power. Yamincha Hashem Tirat Soyev, your right hand shatters the enemy. Meaning it's just using the metaphor that already existed. So I don't think that it's in opposition to the left hand. It's a suggestion that the right hand has strength. The right hand has might, the right hand has that ability, so that's why that's there. Okay? That to me is, you can see how it continues, right? Uv'chein tein kavod, right? Here we see an interesting, again, that dance goes to an interesting place, right? We go from fear, then place honor on your people, praise on those who fear you, hope into those who seek you, the confidence to speak into all who long for you. Right now, then it's moved into something, right? We think about the parent metaphor as well, right? First we have fear, then we move into honor, right? Honor is not like love, right? It's very different, but it has elements, right? It's certainly not. We don't have the same negative connotation with honor that we might with fear. And it continues with righteous people. The next page, 386 and 387. Righteous people will see and rejoice, and upright will exult, the pious rebel and joy. Look how that happened. It took, 3 paragraphs? We went from fear, we went from the awe that Simcha was recalling from his youth, right? Right into people in exulting and being joyous. Now, who is reveling and exulting? The righteous, right? All human evil will fade away like smoke as you sweep the will of arrogance from the earth. Why does that happen? How does that happen? If the lesson of Rosh Hashanah works, right? If I go, and if the world goes from recognizing God as king, to fearing God's power and might, to honoring that which God does, and honoring that which God does in kindness for all of humankind, then what will happen?
This will happen.
All human will fade away like smoke.
Yep.
Right? Because, and it's a beautiful line, Ki ta'avir memshelat zadon min ha'aretz, as you sweep the rule of arrogance from the earth. Right? Meaning, God gives human beings the ability to rule over the earth. Right? Whether they deserve it, whether they don't deserve it, right? Meaning, from the Garden of Eden, right? Or the expulsion, right? Right? I forget I'm not good at quoting the Bible, right? But, right? Have mastery over the land.
Right.
You're in control, right? So the fact that I'm, if I'm in medieval times and I'm a lowly, peasant and there's a king, okay, so again, granted that there is only one real king, but fine, in this world there's levels of mastery, right? And that's how the world organized itself, right or wrong. We're much happier to be living in a democracy now where even the person with the most quote unquote power what?
Is limited.
Is limited,
Right.
right? I mean, that's we're thankful for that, right?
Sure.
Because we each are given that opportunity to have mastery, right? But with that mastery comes responsibility. And so we go over there, and again, the next paragraph, I mean, it goes in this progression, and we kind of say it quickly, and we don't really get it. And again, it's a beautiful melody that, and the nusach, the preparation for not the preparation, but the musical motif for this is it's a very nice setting, right? But it goes in a beautiful way, right? We've swept the rule of arrogance from the earth. This is what we're praying for. And again, if we're praying for it, we're saying it to ourselves so that we help to make it happen. So we are part of the solution, not part of the problem, as the cliche goes, right? And then it continues, the second paragraph on 386 and 387. And you, Lord, will rule alone over all those you have made in Mount Zion, the dwelling of your glory, and in Jerusalem, your holy city. The Lord shall reign forever. He is your God, Zion, from generation to generation. Hallelujah. Right? That's what will happen if we succeed in bringing that to fruition. Then, and only then, you are holy and your name is awesome and there's no God but you.
Well, he's holy and
No matter what. Yes, but then
the people will recognize
we got to that point because we've gotten through fear, we've gotten through honor, we've gotten to joy, we've gone to crowning God as king, right? Timloch ata Hashem levadcha al kol ma'asecha. Sorry, levadecha. I got the vowel wrong. Right? You alone, no earthly king, or at least no earthly king that thinks that he or she can usurp your power, right? Like Pharaoh or like the King of England back in the day, right? Divine right of kings, as they say. Right? Then you're holy. Then we recognize, and the whole world can recognize your holiness. I think we'll wrap up there for today, and we'll do the Musaf next time. I think that, but I hope that this has started to give you a feel. There's no way, other than studying this book, which is not a bad idea, to kind of gain an appreciation for everything. But this is the motif. And so when you see these motifs, then you can look ahead. On 399 is the repetition of, and again, the repetition of the Amida is different on the first day and the second day, so you can see it. But now you can follow through and see how each theme is then expanded. And so if you're sitting in shul and bored by the cantor or falling asleep, right? I mean, it's not Yom Kippur yet, so we're not hungry yet, so, right? But, right, so then you say, wait, I don't understand, I'm missing it, right? First of all, you just might hear echoes of some of these words. This is the essence, right? I mean, the fact that the Silent Amida, the Musaf Silent Amida is very, very long on Rosh Hashanah, and we'll deal with that next week. But the Shachrit Amida is not so long. But the repetition is pretty long, all things considered, right? But it's just variations on a theme, right? The same way we might enjoy a piece of music that does the same thing, right? One of my favorite pieces of music, I'm not such a big classical music person. One of my favorite pieces of music is I think it's Appalachian Spring, Copeland's Appalachian Spring, right? Well, if you were to look at the music, right? You look at that melody line of Appalachian Spring, right? It's repetitive. It's boring. Right? But, of course, we know that it's not, because the melody is such that, number one, it's a beautiful melody to begin with. It starts out with such beauty, and it gets expanded and flourished, and so that by the 10th time the orchestra has played it, right? It starts out kind of with just, I forget the version, if it's a flute or a piano or whatever, or a violin, but it starts out very simple and gets expanded and expanded. And we don't go to hear an orchestra play that and say, oh, that was so boring, they played the same melody 20 times. We don't, because each time, just even in the composition, it's expanded. But then, of course, each musician is adding his or her own, touches and flourishes and making it his or her own. So that's what we're doing. That's what the prayers are doing, and that's what each of us is supposed to do, right? Meaning we're supposed to internalize it, not just listen, but internalize it in our own minds and figure out how we can apply that in our lives. So,
Thank you so much. I'm thinking that